All right, we're live, and I'm live again after just doing an episode of Elevate Your Grind. Welcome back to the Lab Report. I am Todd Rosales, and we have the OG Mr. Cannabis Law, the actual Mr. Cannabis Law, back with us today. He had enough free time to join us. I give him crap about that. Dustin, the show went to shit without you. We had a guest on. My daughter made a cameo appearance. There was barking. There was crying. We need you for Law and Order. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for coming back.
Well, I heard it went very well, actually. So I heard Steven did a good job. Your guest did a good job. So hopefully you don't get rid of me after that great performance by my boy Steven.
Never, never, never. Of course not. We're happy that there's always someone in the Mr. Cannabis Law chair. But of course, this show is about speed. So let's get into it. So I've read this headline several times and it confused me with the vote on the MORE Act. So I've yet to actually read the article. So I saved it for this show to have you explain it to me. A congressional committee approves a marijuana bill that will allow research on dispensary cannabis. So I know one of the things we've been fighting for in this industry is the ability to do research. There's been a lot of complaints about the cannabis from the University of Mississippi. I imagine that this must be good news for the industry.
Yeah, it's definitely good news. I think it's good news, but with a grain of salt because it's just passed the House committee. This is not, a fully approved bill that will now become law. But yeah, there's really two issues that the cannabis industry has had because it's Schedule 1. Number one is the ability to do research on it. It's extremely hard to get approved to do research, very costly and timely. And number two is, like you mentioned, University of Mississippi pretty much has a monopoly on sourcing the marijuana for any of the research that is done. And there's been a lot of complaints about the quality of the product coming out of University of Mississippi. So this is definitely a good thing. This will decrease the costs and the hurdles of being able to research, and it will also hopefully open it up to additional sources of cannabis to provide the product for that research. There was actually even an amendment they put in there that would allow state licensed producers of marijuana to supply marijuana for the research, which would be extremely interesting because you'd start to see some universities partnering with some of the private marijuana producers to do research on their strains, and you'll start to see some different intellectual property come out of that. And so not only will we be able to gain information about the medicinal value of it, but I think it could also breed additional innovation as to new strains and new types of products. So it's definitely good news, but this is not law quite yet. So definitely I'm hopeful, but unfortunately it's a long process for a bill to finally become law, and this is a good first step, but we got a long way to go.
After you said this is a long process for a bill to become law, I wish we had the capabilities to show the Schoolhouse Rock video, but we are not that kind of show. On that vein, talking about regulation and research and everything else, the FDA is hosting a meeting next week to help inform cannabis researchers and cultivators about opportunities to protect their IP and promote studies into the plant. They're hosting a webinar which takes place on Wednesday, which might have happened already because I don't remember when this article was written, to encourage cannabis-based drug developers and growers to use drug master files, or DMFs, which are a submission to the FDA used to provide confidential, detailed information about facilities, process, or articles used in the manufacturing process, packaging, and storing of human drug products. Again, I feel like we're taking a lot of steps in the right direction towards being able to truly research this plant without it even being descheduled at this point. So am I reading into this correctly? Having the FDA involved, I imagine that is another good step for this industry.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the more FDA keeps putting out guidance and acknowledging that this industry exists and that it's flourishing and changes need to be made, that's always good for the industry. And intellectual property for any business, for any industry, protecting your intellectual property is extremely important. And, marijuana companies have challenges with trademarks, patents, really anything they're trying to use to protect their intellectual property. And then even the CBD market, I've filed for a lot of different trademarks in the CBD industry, and there are a lot of hurdles. You cannot get a trademark. You will get rejected for a trademark with the USPTO if you file for a trademark for and you list that it is for CBD tincture or CBD in food or CBD as a dietary supplement. You will get rejected. So there are ways to kind of craft those trademarks around that, but it creates a definite challenge for companies to really protect their IP. And so I didn't attend this webinar. I don't know if it was just this last Wednesday or next Wednesday, but it's exciting that the FDA is starting to acknowledge that we need to provide protections for these businesses, and hopefully once again this will breed further innovation. Companies don't want to invest in intellectual property and in innovation if they can't protect that innovation and intellectual property. So hopefully this will breed additional innovation, new products, new developments, new research, and new medicines.
Well, all steps in the right direction. It's all very exciting. And another step in the right direction, someone finally getting behind us. Some of Wall Street's largest banks are no longer screening for marijuana use. Those include Bank of America, Citigroup, Credit Suisse, Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan and Chase, and Wells Fargo. I think, these big, massive Wall Street banks taking steps in kind of leading the industry here. I think it's excellent. I hope it takes a step in normalizing marijuana use across the country. Obviously, this is good news for people who want to work for these banks everywhere. Bad news for people like Dustin who help defend people using marijuana in legal states. So, Dustin, although you're losing a practice area, I'm sure this is something that you like seeing.
Yeah, no, I love to see this, and I've been fighting for employee protections for a long time. In fact, I am actually working with the Broward County Medical Marijuana Advisory Board. I'm a board member on that, and we were supposed to meet yesterday, and I was going to be proposing a resolution for the county to provide some marijuana protections for medical marijuana patients. Unfortunately, that meeting got canceled, so next week we'll be taking up that issue, and I plan to deal with it at a county level. We have not had success at a state level here in Florida, but it's good to see that banks and other employers are going out and taking the lead, and they're not looking for the law to change to require them to provide employee protections. They're going forward and they're just saying, look, we're not going to test for it. So I think that's certainly a victory. I know we've had some pretty big companies down here in Florida take the same position. And so this is great news. More attention to this issue is super important. Here in Florida, we're up to 400,000 patients. I mean, I used to get just a few calls every so often from employees that would test positive. But now that there's, that was when there was 50,000, 100,000 patients. Now there's 400,000 patients. And quite honestly, most of these employees, they don't have a ton of money to fight these cases and to pay my fees. And, I'd love to help everyone as much as I can, but this is not a big revenue producing area for me. So I'd be happy to get rid of this area of law that I practice in exchange for there being, good employee protections, because most of the time employees just don't have the money to pay an attorney to defend them. And, sometimes you could take it on contingency or pro bono, and I've done that before as well. But there's a lot of people, as this patient count continues to grow, more and more of these patients are starting to get tested by their employers and testing positive and losing their job because of it. And it's extremely unfortunate. It's called the medicine in our Florida Constitution, yet we don't have employee protections that allow us to use it. So it's a huge issue that I've been fighting for, and I'm going to continue to fight for. And I'm hopeful that Broward County will take the lead and be the first county in the state of Florida to have some affirmative steps taken to protect those employees.
Very cool. Well, I love the theme of this week's lab report. It seems like everything that we're discussing are progressive and things are going in the right direction towards our industry. Here in the state of Florida, not an article, but a topic that I want to bring up. Was it last week or the week before, we finally got the regulations on edibles down. I know that you've put out a lot of information about this. We have edibles, or we're going to have edibles in Florida now. I'm really excited about that. We saw in the news that Wana Brands made a deal with Move, and then a company that I'm a very big fan of, Big Pete's Treats, which is one of my favorite edible companies out in California. they inked a deal with Liberty Health Sciences, which is actually the closest dispensary to my house. So I'm super excited for this, Dustin. But now that we have those regulations, we're starting to see some of these brands come in, the deals being made. Is there anything else that we need to understand? Give us an in-depth dive on edibles in Florida.
Yeah, I mean, it's impressive how quickly some of these MMTCs were able to quickly pull the trigger, get their variances in with the Department of Health, and get their products approved. Trulieve, of course, first one's approved. Kim Rivers, no surprise, she was ready to go and ready to get her products approved and put on the shelf. So I think it just took a few days for products to be available at Trulieve, and you're starting to see more and more licensing deals. It's still very interesting because some of these licensing deals with some of these brands, they're very popular in some of these recreational markets, and they have really cool packaging, really cool marketing. But one thing I always remind some of these brands, I get calls all the time with some of these brands that want to get into Florida and do these licensing deals. You have to remind them this is a medical market. We have our own packaging laws, our own marketing laws, and that could sometimes be challenging in a licensing deal. I know it was challenging with the Dosis Certera licensing deal. I think Dosis had plans of doing all sorts of marketing and packaging for it, but really Florida law didn't provide for that, didn't allow for that. So it'll be interesting how some of these edible kind of recreational national brands get integrated into the Florida medical market. But I'm very excited for the edibles. I think it's definitely something that is long overdue. So I think it's going to the revenues are going to go up. I mean, I'm not here to give investment advice, and I've been pretty critical on how some of the MMTCs have spent their money. But I will tell you right now, if you're an investor, pay attention to these edibles because revenues are about to go through the roof here in Florida.
No, I think it's really exciting. I'm excited to see it. I'm excited to see it progress, especially as a patient and as a fan of the industry. And then this is one that I'm very happy. Finally, somebody has listened to all my rants, or at least I'm going to take credit for it because I know I'm not the only one up on this soapbox. But county leaders across New York call for marijuana legalization to address budget shortfalls due to coronavirus. Come on, New York, do what you do and set the trend for the rest of the country. You give us music, you give us fashion, now give us legal weed as a way to get out of this depression or recession that we're facing. I'm very optimistic about this, but like everything else that I bring up, it's something that is just being brought up and still needs to be voted on. I know that New York came close to legalizing before. I don't know how familiar you are with New York, but do you think that, is this a direction that we think New York is going to go? And are other states across the country going to follow suit, especially if they see success?
Yeah, I mean, we talk about this every single week that clearly, there's a economic crisis right now, and a very simple solution partially obviously doesn't solve the whole issue, but a part of the solution could certainly be cannabis legalization, bring in additional tax revenue, improve employment. And obviously the counties in New York are taking note of that, and they're basically requesting that the state do something about it and put it within their budget. Now, whether or not this will move forward, much like the bill that we talked about earlier, how it's a long process and it takes some time, I think it's the same thing here. I mean, they're definitely looking at it, but from the quotes that I read from Cuomo, it doesn't necessarily look like this is something that's going to quickly happen. But I do see New York, going rec relatively soon. I know Cuomo's been pretty outspoken about wanting to go recreational, and it was kind of complex in their last legislative session. They weren't able to get it through. But I think New York definitely is one of those states we need to keep an eye on. And I don't know that they'll be the next adult use state, but I do think that we'll be seeing adult use there in the very near future. So, once again, cannabis is the right way to go. Cannabis legalization is the right way to go for just so many reasons, whether it's economic, social injustices. There's just so many mental stress that we're seeing. There's a mental health crisis going on as well that we could potentially assist with. So many reasons to legalize cannabis, and it seems like more and more people are starting to get on board, and hopefully we'll see more counties pushing their states to continue to look into adult use cannabis legalization.
Well, I'm excited about this because even though a lot of these things may or may not happen, it seems that our industry is getting a lot of at bats. And eventually, with enough at bats, we're going to put a bat on the ball and something's going to happen. So I'm excited to watch a lot of these. And then the last thing, we're done with the news, but I wanted to turn the floor over to you. A lot of people don't realize not only are you Mr. Cannabis Law, you're also Mr. Psychedelic Law. You mentioned the mental health crisis, PTSD, all that other stuff. Obviously, you're an advocate for plant based medicine of all sorts. I believe you have something coming up that we'd like to tell people about.
Yeah, so September 20th, my not-for-profit, Mr. Psychedelic Law, is we're collaborating with Silo Health, and we are putting on a virtual event on September 20th. So if you're interested in attending the event, it's filling up super quickly. I think we'll probably be totally sold out probably by the end of this, probably by like Monday or Tuesday. So if you're interested, you could go to my Instagram, Mr. Cannabis Law. It's in my bio. You could click the Eventbrite link, register. Definitely try to do that as quickly as possible. Like Todd mentioned, there's a mental health crisis, and I'm working with a lot of doctors. I think probably 50% of the people that are going to be speaking are doctors of some sort. And so we have psychologists. We have Scott Fisher, psychiatrist, who he is doing some clinical research with USONA right here in Fort Lauderdale on psilocybin's effect on depression. We have Dr. Michelle Weiner, who's doing some amazing stuff with end of life use of psychedelics. Just multiple. We have the CEO of TheraPsil, that basically they provided in Canada the mushrooms that were allowed to be given to the patient for end of life use. So you may have saw the headlines for that in Canada. It made a lot of news in the psychedelic industry. So we're going to be talking about some of the current medical research, and we're also going to be talking about the legal reform in Florida. So if you have any interest in the psychedelic industry, highly recommend you register for the event and get involved.
Awesome. And then the last thing I want to tell everybody is next Thursday, 4:20 p.m. is going to be another C-Lab panel. It's going to be on banking and cannabis. It's not one that you're going to want to miss. www.joinclab.com. Use the code CLAB100 to get into that event for free. It's going to be awesome. I'll be there. Dustin will be there. Maybe you can interact with us in the Zoom meeting if you want. But Dustin, that's the headlines in 20 minutes or less. Any last words of wisdom?
No, nothing at all. I guess just a quick shout out to, the people for it's 9/11 today. So, our hearts and prayers go out to all those that lost someone or were involved in any way. So hopefully everyone, takes a second to acknowledge that and is just grateful for being here today and being grateful for how our country was able to rebound from those horrible events.
Absolutely. Those are great words, Dustin. And thank you, everybody, for watching the Lab Report. We will see you next week.
Have a good